Welcome, everyone. It's lovely to see all these faces here. And good evening to you all. As folks continue to trickle in, I thought I'd say a quick hello. My name is Reverend Tom Reed, and I am the Associate Director of the Miller Center for Interreligious Learning and Leadership of Hebrew College. And it is my pleasure and privilege to welcome you all here this evening to this panel discussion in response to what is the inaugural installation of the new Hebrew College Arts Initiative. Thank you all for coming, and a special thank you to our partners at Combined Jewish Philanthropies, CJP, whose support has made this special installation possible. As I like to do in many of our many Zoom meetings and events, I'd like to invite us all to remind ourselves that we are embodied creatures and to take a deep breath together. Take a couple of deep breaths. So inhale, please, and exhale. Inhale once more, and exhale. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. I will be your moderator for the evening. And we're going to start off the evening with a brief video presentation that features some of the images that are on display in the exhibition that we're here tonight in response to. And this will give you a taste of the full collection and will help to ground our conversation together this evening.
How I fight my battles. Good evening, everyone. I'm Rose, and before I join my fellow panelists and friends, I have the pleasure of introducing the curator of this deeply moving, deeply evocative photographic exhibit, my dear friend, a fellow traveler in the interreligious realm, a visionary and a champion of love, one Brenda Bancel, coming to us live from New York City. So Brenda, thank you so much. And if you would, we'd love to hear a little bit about your vision, the inspiration and the vision of this important and timely exhibit.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. This all kind of started because Rosa and I went for a walk, and we came up with this idea that what would make us happy, maybe looking at some photos of faith and how people were getting together in their faith. And to be frank, this last year has been quite a journey for me and our family. And what I'll say is it felt like a really long winter. And I sort of, in our faith, God talks a lot about the winter and the seasons and the harvest. So for me, this year has been sort of a lesson in patience and waiting for sort of what's the harvest after all of this. Personally, as a photographer, I just didn't really feel compelled to pick up my camera myself. I wasn't wanting to re-see those images again and again of what was going on. But it did make me really happy to see how these faith groups were being so creative and coming together and still celebrating and digging into their faith in really powerful and important ways. And what I had written about the show is one of the things as I was working through this year, as many people were, I had started to look into sort of some nature, and I was studying the sequoia tree. And the sequoia tree became sort of this analogy for me about what faith is and what this moment is that we've all been going through. And the sequoia tree is like one of the oldest trees in the world. They can live for 3,000 years. They never stop growing. They can be 26 floors large. They can be 30 feet in diameter. They're just enormous trees, and they're incredibly strong. But in order for them to reproduce, the cones have to be set on fire. So if the cones are on fire, the seed can then escape and reproduce. And so the sequoia needs to suffer in order to have life. And then I thought the interesting thing is that actually the sequoia, it doesn't die from fire. The bark protects it. But the only way the sequoia dies is it will fall over because its roots aren't deep enough for its height and its weight. So the way that the sequoia lives is they pull on each other's roots so that they don't fall down. And so for me, it was like watching these people pull on each other's roots so that we didn't fall down, knowing that in the suffering, there would be a harvest. By doing this exhibit, it wasn't so much about the photos or the exhibit, it was what are the discussions that'll happen around the exhibit? Because those are really exciting to me. Like, I want to hear, how did people express their faith during this moment? What did they learn? What are they going to carry with them? And so really for me, the most exciting thing is hearing from faith leaders and people who, other people who went through this year, like how did they get through it? What are they going to take with them? What did they really miss? So I'm super just fortunate that we're here to have that discussion this evening.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you for that beautiful image of the sequoia trees and how we are in this together, and we need to be relying on each other's roots to continue to make it through this pandemic that is not over yet. Thank you for your inspiration. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our three esteemed panelists for the evening. You already got to meet Rabbi Rose, but a little bit more about him. He is the founding director of the Miller Center for Interreligious Learning and Leadership of Hebrew College. And I have the pleasure of working with him on and being a fellow traveler, as to use the term I've learned from him. Rabbi Rose is the author or editor of various scholarly and popular works, including the recently published Deep Understanding for Divisive Times by the Interreligious Studies Press, and Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi, Essential Teachings, published by Orbis Books in 2020. And Dr. Celene Ibrahim is also joining us. She serves on the faculty of the Groton School, where she offers courses in religious studies and philosophy. Dr. Ibrahim is the author of the recently published Woman and Gender in the Qur'an, and the editor of One Nation, which I have a copy of as well, One Nation, Indivisible, Seeking Liberty and Justice from the Pulpits to the Streets, published in 2019. And last, but certainly not least, we have Reverend Dr. Shively T.J. Smith, who I am thankful to say I was fortunate enough to have as my professor before I graduated from Boston University School of Theology, where Reverend Dr. Smith is assistant professor of New Testament. She has written a monograph, Strangers to Family, Diaspora and First Peter's Invention of God's Household, and articles on Howard Thurman, womanist hermeneutics, and Christian Testament studies in general. Welcome to our panelists, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Let's start with the video we watched together a few minutes ago. As you watched the video, what is one image that captured your attention and why? Dr. Smith, let's start with you, if you will.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I thank you again just for this wonderful, wonderful movie exhibit, and just the sneak peek and glimpse of it moves me. The image that really caught my attention for a variety of reasons was the image of the Zoom, the two computers and the Zoom meeting. And it's the 70th anniversary of liberation from Auschwitz. And then you have what looks like the engineer in the background, and then there's the candle. And from that entire scene, from the content that's in the Zoom to even this experience of now we're having this commemoration and having to create space virtually to remember the journeys of our communities and of our ancestors, and to allow that to still have its work, is speaking so powerfully to me from my own context. I'm also the resident scholar for the Cathedral of the African Methodist Episcopal Church International, Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C. You may know of this church. That is our church that was attacked by the Proud Boys and the white supremacist group. And so that's striking to me, because when we got word that had happened the night before, I was actually online on Zoom leading the church in our 30-minute worship and meditation in Howard Thurman. And so when we found out that was happening, I was the one that had to sort of extend the service, or be prepared to extend the service while things were shifting. And I was just thinking about how that Zoom piece, how this represents a deep resilience in our faith. We always talk about faith being the source of our life in our communities, but faith can also be the catalyst. And my church was not necessarily doing a lot of the online streaming and pieces before then, but has really lived in and moved into this. And our faith, our community, our story of our peoplehood, the Church of Frederick Douglass, Lawrence Dunbar, Rosa Parks, so on and so on, made a demand on us to create and imagine what it means to come together as a community, even in this space. And this I find so powerful, that faith is not only reminding us of who we are and what our community is, but faith also, and it's not only a source, but it also is a catalyst for us to reimagine what it means for us to convene as believing peoples in spite of. I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ibrahim, do you want to share with us your image or images?
Yeah, so my heart is longing to return to the Kaaba. And so when I saw the pictures of the Kaaba, But I had an interesting reaction because most of the time when I'm close to the Kaaba, it's so many people, you're crunched in, you're trying to do your worship, but all of these people are packed together. And so actually when I saw the picture of the people all spaced out, walking very orderly around the Kaaba here, my first thought was actually one of celebration, like, wow, that must be so nice to just, be there and walk at your leisure and not worry about losing the person next to you in the sea of people. And so what that prompted me to think about was the ways in which this pandemic has brought a need for order and organization in a way that wasn't there before. And for instance, in a place like the Grand Sanctuary in Mecca, now we all of a sudden have these new technologies where you're able to book your time so that it does not get crowded past its capacity. And there's a part of me that relishes that kind of chaotic spirituality where everybody's just trying to pack in and get into this relatively small space. But then there's another part of me that craves this kind of orderly, organized way of experiencing spirituality and experiencing the sacredness of that place. And so I'm really in a place of being torn between the silver lining that in some ways having this moment, as you say, Dr. Shively, this catalyst moment to reimagine things anew, and still mourning that, for instance, our family did not get to go this year, and I did not get to experience that sort of yearly rejuvenation that has become so much a part of my own spiritual life. But the longing remains, and hopefully we will have, inshallah, God willing, we'll have a time to return, and maybe I'll get some space.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Rabbi Rose, which image spoke to you?
Thank you both. I've been looking forward to this conversation for several weeks now because I've had the privilege of seeing various previews and the exhibit in full last Sunday, which was the first semi-public event at Hebrew College. By public, I mean 11 and a half of us were there distance, but we got to see the panorama of the exhibit. So I'm really moved to hear your responses, Shively and Celene. I cheated because I have seen more of the images, and there's one image that has stayed with me for weeks now, as Tom and Brenda both know. So I'll share my screen again. Can you all see the photograph to my left on the screen?
Yes.
So this is a photograph that either Brenda took herself or was given to her from a local church community. Brenda, can you clarify for me?
Yeah, so the set of images we saw at the beginning were all sourced through the Getty and their photojournalism work. There's an entirely separate wall in the Hebrew College of local work from local community. And this is an image that was given to me by New Roots, which is the Church of the Reverend Mariama White Hammond, and photos that they just took during their communion when they were together in the different programs they were doing.
Thank you. So the combination of the green grass, the outdoors, this little African-American boy masked, and the sign with the word rest on it just hit me. And it feels like it has moved through me on several levels over the last few weeks. What does it mean to speak of rest in a time of pandemic? what is the earth? What is the divine trying to say to us about the quote unquote normal rhythms of life and the ways in which we are constantly moving to and fro in a kind of spastic manner, oftentimes, not knowing when we're coming and when we're going, but just so restless. And at the same time, of course, that rest, quote unquote, has been levied upon us with such a heavy price. And there's just been far too much pain and far too much loss. Furthermore, when I look at this picture, I can't help but think about the pandemic and the social uprising of the last year. It's not accidental that these came together. The pandemic has laid bare long-standing injustices, and in some cases, of course, has exacerbated it. And so to look at this young African-American boy, knowing what we aspire to be as a country, knowing that we hope and pray and are working for justice, but also knowing the reality of what it will likely mean for this boy and then young man to grow up in this country, given the realities of systemic racism, is really jarring and painful. And part of my experience, of course, is informed, like each and every one of us, by our own experiences this year and in the past. And this year I've had the blessing of working with young people more so than I have in 20 years. So on a weekly basis, I'm working with teens from across Greater Boston on a COVID-19 youth commission. And 2/3 of the kids in the group are BIPOC kids, kids from communities of color, many of whom are from communities that are financially underprivileged, let us say, and underserved. And it is remarkable to see the ways in which all of these young people have made a commitment to work together. Kids from the suburbs, kids from the city, Black, white, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, atheist, agnostic, they've been thrust together. And there is among them not only a sense of rest, but restlessness and an urgent sense that they have a role to play in the healing of our city. So all of that just sort of washed over me over the last few weeks, looking through these pictures. And I want to meet this little boy. I want to be in his presence. I want to understand better, what the sign means and what the context was for him drawing that beautiful picture, whatever it is. And I hope and pray that I'll have the opportunity. Mariama is a friend and a colleague, and the church is not so far away. So I'm looking forward to learning more, but it's amazing to me how powerful one image can be. It's cliche, but all that, has landed on my heart from this one image is proof of the power of this kind of visual artistry and what it evokes.
Thank you, Rabbi Rose, and thank you all for sharing what's stirring within you as a result of these initial images. Shifting a little bit to the personal now, and in this time of disruption and disconnection that we have been in so long, I'd love to hear from each of you what is one ritual practice, and it could be religious or otherwise, that has helped you during this pandemic and this time of, as I said, disruption and isolation. Celene, Dr. Ibrahim, can we start with you?
Sure. Well, as Dr. Shalomi, you've mentioned before, the pandemic has caused so many things to go online, right? And I had long been craving to do more traditional studies of the Qur'an. And for me, it's a very humbling experience. I meet weekly with a group of women, and I'm learning from a teacher who has what's called an isnad, meaning she has learned from someone who has learned from someone who has learned from someone, going all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And so I'm finally getting my chance to do more of this traditional study. And why I say it's so humbling is that it's a very technical, very difficult, it's like the equivalent of learning how to be a cantor or in the Jewish tradition. And so I come to this as this scholar with a Western degree and the DR to my name, and yet I'm stumbling, trying to remember, is this the time when I emphasize the meme, or is this the time when the noon drops? And oh, my mouth is having a hard time going from the qaf to the da in Arabic, and and the ayn with this, and all these rules are swimming in my mind. It's really it's very sophisticated things, but alhamdulillah, I just thank Allah for the opportunity to do this traditional study, which even a year ago would have required that I actually physically go somewhere. But now all of this knowledge is just streaming from the computer. So I'm immensely grateful for that little routine in my life where I get to stop being the teacher. I'm at a boarding school where I teach 6 days a week. And so Sunday is my one day where I get to step back and really be that learner. So I'm grateful for the opportunity and all that humility that's required to step in from teacher into really struggling student.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Dr. Smith, do you want to share?
Oh, that was just amazing what Dr. Ibrahim said. I'm just really can't wait to talk to her after after the event. I'm so inspired by that. I'm going to probably do a both and, so 1.5, Tom, 1.5. I have what is a part of my daily routine that I brought into this was I read Thurman's Meditations as a part of my spiritual anchoring that shows up even in my teaching and in gathering spaces. I always begin with that as a centering moment. I realized that I had, short of when I'm in front of people and engaging an audience, that had turned into a silent visual reading, not a reading out loud. Whereas when I'm doing it in class or with people, it is also the performance and the projection, which is actually something Thurman was committed to, the ways in which you amplify and use your body and your voice. And so I embody that in front of people, but I had stopped making that a part of my own personal experience and found myself leaning into a Thurman belief that I matter, that the first responsibility I have is to myself. And started reading his meditations out loud and performing it, so to speak, for myself, which led to me beginning a ritual of stretching. And I mean, sitting in front of these screens, sitting in front of our bodies or up, especially for those of us that are professors and teaching and all of this, and you sit in this space, and as comfortable as this is, there is nothing like just taking up the space on the floor and laying out multiple yoga mats and stretching out and feeling the stretch and breathing through it. And that has become a part of my ritual life too. And what was like, let me do it at least once a day. There's nothing for me to get off a Zoom meeting and to pull out one of my yoga mats and to start stretching in the middle of the floor. And I've got a Thurman meditation in front of me that I'm reading out loud, even if I'm just saying a sentence over and over again as a way to get me to breathe through the stretching. That has been so powerful in connecting my head and my heart and my hand together and reminding me that I am a whole person and anchoring me in something that's bigger than just even my brain. And I'm thankful for that. And that's something I would like to preserve. The funny piece is I can imagine what it might look like for my graduate students to walk into my office in Boston University and see Dr. Smith laid out on the floor and the mat. So I may have to figure out how to explain that. But nonetheless, that's something that I have been able to cultivate and that I am finding renewed life in.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's amazing. Thurman and stretching on yoga mats.
Yoga mats, right.
Phenomenal. Rabbi Rose, what's one of your practices?
I'll follow the lead of my colleague, Dr. Smith, and do 1.5. So one particular moment, Tom, actually that you were a part of was last Passover, not just a month ago, but a year ago, was our first Zoom Pesach Seder. And it was actually the first Seder that I celebrated with my parents in some years, because they live in St. Louis and we live in Boston. And so it was a bittersweet moment. And opening the door for Elijah the prophet, which is one of the seminal moments of the Passover Seder, felt especially poignant. And if I tear up, you'll excuse me, but my mom and dad are here. Elijah, in our tradition, is the one who we hope and pray at the end of days will answer all of the questions, all of the vexing questions that no sage, no scholar, no prophet can answer. So to be on screen with my parents halfway across the country, to have them be with my children in this intergenerational moment par excellence, to fill that cup and to open the door, to get up in an embodied way and just say, I don't understand. There's just so much happening at once, and it's a lot to bear. So for me, that was an incredibly poignant moment. And as my therapist has been teaching me to say and embrace, you can't have poignancy without pain. Otherwise, it's not poignant. So that was one moment. Something more regular is that I've become an active member of a little known synagogue called the Honda Civic. And when I get into my car, I have a playlist now of Jewish music that has become for me my tefillah, my script. And it's 6 or 7 different pieces, mostly from the Book of Psalms, that have been set to music by various contemporary Jewish musicians. And I just belt it out. I am driving and I am singing and I'm crying and lighty-dying to my heart's content. And I have found it hard to maintain other kinds of rituals that were a part of my life before the pandemic, but even then waning. But anytime I'm in the car and I have a ride to and from my son's school, which is about 30 minutes away, it becomes real davening, as we say. It is an opportunity where I just turn up and in, and I don't know who, when, where, or why God, but it's my opportunity for encounter. And thank God for those ancient, beautiful, bold, angry, persistent poets of the Psalms, and for the contemporary voices that continue to work with those ancient materials and help us put one foot in front of the other.
Thank you all again for that sharing. Shifting now from the personal and individual to back to this issue of separation and disconnection. I would love to hear from each of you how you have gone about creating, or where you have discovered, or how you have managed to sustain community during this, to use the whatever the oft quoted unprecedented year. How have you manage to connect with the community in these times. And to continue my mixing up, or we'll start with you this time.
I'm going to defer for a moment. I need to regather myself
Okay.
and ask one of these incredibly capable colleagues of mine to
All
go
right.
ahead, and then I'll take a
Absolutely.
breath.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Smith.
I'll jump on in. I have find myself talking less about sustaining community and creating community. So the communities that I had going into the pandemic definitely deepened. And I see the rootedness of those relationships deepened, but there were some relationships that were in the very nascent stages, or life was so busy for me in terms of travel and moving back and forth. You know, you had those one prime examples. I had two women scholars, professors, deeply spiritual women at my church who every time I saw them, I loved them. I knew that we were kindred spirits and could potentially be bosom buddies for anybody who's knows Anne of Green Gables, because that's like one of my favorite all time, so whatever. So, and you know, you just have that sense that if I could just have a little bit of time with you, I think there could be something there. And so everything stopped, and they sent a text and I sent a text, and we checked in with each other. And the next thing you know, it turned into a trio text message. And there's not a day that has gone by that we're not sending texts, checking in with each other, or we know what each other is doing, or what we're trying to apply for, or what we're trying to get done, and we're cheerleading each other on. And so that's one community. So this sort of my kindred spirit sisters, bosom buddies, I kind of felt they could be that if I just had a little time, gave me time to do that and to figure out how to do that, that I feel so deeply thankful for. This happened again in a larger piece. I'm a part of a scholarly circle of women of color all over the country. Actually, it's a group of us, just a little bit over half dozen of us. We knew one person, and someone else knew someone, and we've created a sort of working writing group. At first it was formal, so we would meet at a formal time. Now it's nothing. Some of us are very early people, and some of us are very late people. So again, another group, we have our own little name. I won't say the name of it. And you and the group, and you'll see a text at 5:30, 6 a.m. in the morning, and someone will say, I'm getting on Zoom to work, right? Anybody want to join me? And you'll have I might say, yeah, I'll be there in 20 minutes. And, you were kind of laying there like, oh, I don't think I want to do any more work. And then you get that encouragement that someone's going to be in the space with you, so to speak, and you show up to do your work. Or you'll get a text that someone else will say, I cannot believe you all are up at this I go back to bed. And so that has been what this something for me, that community. There were some communities that I wanted, that I needed, that, the inner part of me knew that I needed that relationship, or I needed that community. And I had not slowed down before the pandemic to identify that, discern that, and cultivate that. And then all of a sudden, everything stops. And although I know we do not talk about the pandemic as being gift and all of that, I think there's some real theological challenges with that, particularly when I think about my own communities that have been victimized severely by different things. But then on the flip side, I have found a gift in the midst of all this tragedy and loss. And that has been the gift of having people I am now able to come alongside of, and they have come alongside me. And they're not just coming alongside, they have become my siblings in the journey. And I know that I can't, that will go with me after this moment. And I am so deeply grateful for that. I know that's a long-winded statement, Tom, I'm sorry. So, but for me, I find this at being a space in which community has been created. And just to circle back to the exhibit, there was not a picture, Brenda, in your exhibit that I saw in the 3-minute clip that didn't strike me as reminding us of the power of what it means to journey in life's challenges and in life's joys with others, that there are always others that we should be looking to join with or invite to join with us. And those pictures to me represented this global, interreligious, interfaith journeying that we have had to figure out how to do during this time. And we have. And I hope that we continue to do that work.
Amen. And that was not long-winded at all. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Dr. Ibrahim.
It resonates deeply with what I was going to bring as well. And on our street, we have 3 families that kind of consist of our little pod, and all the kids were studying from home and all the adults were working from home, which, you know, is itself its own element of privilege. And I really recognize that. But we were able to pod together, and it was a family of Cambodian descent who had recently moved to the neighborhood, and then my family, like Arab Americans, and then a family who were like deeply steeped in like an Irish American. And here we are, we're like this newly constituted family, and we celebrated Thanksgiving together and Christmas together. And we didn't work it out quite well because our family hosted New Year's, but we were like, sorry guys, this is like a dry New Year's. So, but the you know, not to exaggerate on the stereotypes, but the Irish family went along with it, and
Right.
yeah, and but it was just like those moments when we were sitting around the table, and it was like these family traditions that were now we were the newly constituted family. And, you know, and to see, to kind of think about this, and you have to appreciate we're in a very rural New Hampshire town, and it's just like it spoke to me of the changing demographics of America, and you know, not only that we were a new family constituted, but it kind of spoke to me about the potential to just imagine family in these different ways. So that was one. They've been my, you know, just to be in person, to be able to hug somebody, to be able to sit next to somebody. That to me, that has been the way in which I'm getting that type of like physical closeness. At the same time, I'm working at a school where, because of the immense amounts of historical privilege and socioeconomic privilege, the kids are tested all the time. And so we're actually back in person, and I've stopped noticing the fact that we're all masked, and you know, that we have to keep some semblance of distance. Although if you put a bunch of high schoolers together, it really gets monotonous to keep saying, keep your distance. So we as faculty have kind of almost given up on this. But when the pandemic first struck, that sense of slowing down. I'm actually a person who just loves reading, and I finally, like, the people who I was spending time with were the people on my shelf who I'd been like waiting to spend time with, but that, you know, the pandemic finally just gave me that time to catch up on reading. And so for a good part of the past year, my community has been Judith Butler and El Ghazali, like, you know, everyone from moderns to ancients, and you know, these are the voices I'm speaking with in my head. I'm okay, I think I'm okay, but yeah, and the other community, I just have to put a word in here for the work of the Miller Center, because from my first experience of an online concert about, you know, a year ago from today, and you know, all the way through this really creative programming, really pushing the boundaries of how we gather and what we do when we gather. So I'm so appreciative of all the work that has to happen behind the scenes for us to be able to show up and feel this human connection.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. That means a lot. Rabbi Rose?
So in addition to my family and pre-pandemic friends and colleagues, I have been rooted and guided by two communities at different life stages. I, for the last 20 years, have been a visiting rabbi in Chatham, New York, which to Bostonians, I simply say a synagogue in the Berkshires because it's close enough. For folks on the New York side of the border, I would never say that. Phooey, the Berkshires. In any case, Lydia Kukoff, who's one of the founders, is a part of that community. And I began there in my 20s. And this kind of ragtag community didn't want a rabbi. I didn't really want to be a rabbi, but we wanted and needed each other. All of these years later, in fact, this year in particular, I am less ambivalent than ever before about being a rabbi, simply because there are just so many people in need. And if I can do anything to help, hineni, here I am. But this community is constituted mostly of people in their 70s, 80s, and some in their 90s. And the truth of the matter is that I've spent more time with that community this year than ever before because there isn't a 2.5-hour drive. And so we've studied more together, we've prayed more together. I've been able to spend time offline with people in more intimate ways. I'm not just coming and going, and that's been tremendously gratifying and meaningful, while also really feeling of service, because clearly people that are older in the pandemic have been more vulnerable. And this community does an exceptional job of supporting one another through thick and thin. And it's really been a bracha. It's been a blessing to be a part of it. At the other end of the spectrum, as I mentioned before, I'm doing more work with teens than I have, I think, since I was a bar bat mitzvah tutor, trying to scrape together a living, in my early 20s. And it's amazing. Brenda and Nancy have daughters in two of the programs that we're offering. And every time I have the opportunity to be working with these young people, it's energizing. They understand that this is a really shitty time. And they still have the energy and the courage and the naivete and the idealism to say, we're going to change the world. So on the days, especially when I'm feeling really down, being in their presence and working together is life-giving, to say the least.
Thank you, Or. I have one or two more questions for the panel, but if I wanted to put it out there for the audience, if you have any questions or things you want to talk about, please pop those into the chat, and we'll open this up for some broader Q&A shortly. But while you're thinking of questions, and I hope putting those into the chat box, for our panelists, I know I have been thinking about the tension between who we are being in this space and then whatever it is we will go back to or go forward to as we create a new world out of this. And Dr. Smith, you touched on this a little bit, but what is one lesson from the pandemic that you are hoping to carry with you back into whatever new normal looks like? And I'll let whoever feels moved to respond first go, and then for the panel.
Tom, you went out a little bit on my end. I think my internet dropped. Can you repeat that? My apologies.
Yes. What's one lesson from the pandemic that you want to carry with you into whatever the new normal looks like?
I want to carry that no woman, no person is an island,
Mm.
and that I must not allow the busyness of the daily round and of my routine impede my relatedness to others and impede me cultivating relatedness to others. Um, I feel deep shame about that, to think that, to slow down and say, wow, there are so many um, things that I put on hold, and what is most valuable is relatedness to others.
Mm.
And to carry that forward into some really important values and my ways of being post pandemic is what I most want to hold on to. Can I say something kind of fun, relate, like a couple of concrete things
Of course.
so especially for my Boston University School of Theology people, one thing like I am committed to when I come back is at Boston University School of Theology, we had the ritual of the Wednesday communal meal. So you would have the worship or gathering moment, and then you have the communal meals for lunch. I miss those. So the food is one thing that always solves my Wednesday midweek food problem. Because it's always but the other is the joy and the experience of walking in the hallway, and it would be these long lines, and it's colleagues, it's students, it's friends, it's visitors, and we're all sharing a meal together. I miss that. I miss the joy and the energy and the chaos of that. And I think, you used to, sometimes you're like, oh, you could be frustrating, especially if you're hungry or if you're having to get somewhere. But there was something life-giving and important about that moment that I am looking forward to returning to. And that moment, that chaotic, everyone crammed into a space, trying to eat, trying to find a seat, connecting, is a moment that I want to embrace, not just then, but in other spaces as well.
Thank you for taking me back to community lunch as well. Those are special times, and were part of what convinced me that BU was the place for me. It's wonderful. So thank you. Dr.
Do you
Ibrahim?
want to jump in? Do you want to follow that? Well, I hesitate to say what I was going to say because it's not quite as joyous. It's a place where I'm really, after 6 days now, waking up and the first thing on my feed is some type of mass shooting, or
Yeah.
I'm in a place where, like, is this our new normal? Like, what is our new normal?
That's right. That's
and
right.
yeah. And part of the thing that I'm appreciating of what the pandemic brought was a sense that we cannot be normal. Whatever our normal is, it wasn't working for everyone.
Right.
So I'm just in my own teaching, I've just had more urgency. I've been a little bit, I proposed a class on racial justice that I was like, before that, thinking, oh, they'll never let me do that, and now they did. And just like these little things that I feel like have shifted. And at the same time, there's kind of this reactionary shift as well. So I spoke about being from a small town in New Hampshire. We just voted as a town community on a bill that on its surface said that we wanted to create equity, diversity, and justice in our school system. But when you read the fine print, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, if this is something that's happening in your part of the country as well. But when you read the fine print, it said, we want to go back to Dr. King's version of America. And this is a whitewashed version of Dr. King's version of America. And the bill that on its surface brought the town together to vote for equity, diversity, and unity was in fact a bill to prohibit the teaching of critical race theory in our schools. And the rage in me that and it specifically cited the work of Dr. Ibrahim Kindi, you know,
Kindi.
to bring you back into the picture here. And the bill in its fine print drew this distinction between MLK, this whitewashed, you know, intentionally whitewashed version of MLK, and said, we want this version of unity and justice instead of this radical, divisive. And you know, for me, it's like, how dare you, you know, take the legacy of a civil rights icon and you know, warp it to be, you know, just about unity, right? No, it's about justice, right? And we cannot achieve the unity until we've achieved some semblance of justice. So these, you know, these questions, I'm just swirling. They're swirling in my head. Like, what is this new normal? Like, have we learned anything? I feel like Isaiah or something here. But it's that, you know, coming back, like will our collective suffering enable us to strive for that justice, or have we just, you know, are we just waiting to put this behind us without looking at what it has revealed to us?
Thank you for naming that, and that is powerful and important to this time. And I know I'm hoping that we've turned a corner as a country and are going to work toward justice rather than go back to before and forget about these so many people who have died and been murdered, and you know, the several sick folks who have been murdered just was it yesterday in Indianapolis? I can't keep track of time, but you know, one of our colleagues, Simranjit Singh, who is an incredible voice for representing the Sikh community in the world, and he was trying to again educate people that we're once again being attacked for people misunderstanding who we are. Not that anybody should be attacked, but people are being targeted for who they are, and it's awful. And we need to be better than that, and I hope we can emerge from that. So thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Rabbi Rose.
So much important words and values have already been shared. I think I'll just add that for me, I want to retain as much as possible the vulnerability that I've allowed to be present even on this call, and that I have both unwittingly and consciously cultivated. And I want to try and cultivate it in others. Because I think it is a part of the recipe for healing, for integration, and for change. You know, can we look each other in the eye and say, this hurts me, instead of, let me tell you why you are wrong. But can I begin with, this is what hurts me, or this is what I'm scared of? And we as a society are so poor at that. We are much better coming out swinging with all of that bravado and self-righteousness and condemnation and cancellation. And so, you know, Brenda's previous exhibit was entitled, you know, Holding Our Differences Tenderly.
I love that.
And some of that tenderness, you know, is bound up with vulnerability. You know, the older folks that I mentioned from the community in Chatham have been such incredible models for that. People who were not willing or able to say, even a year ago, I'm in the last years of my life, and I need to sift and sort carefully. How do I want to spend the rest of my days? And what do I want to leave behind? And you have to open yourself in order to do that. Or the young people that I'm working with who, you know, mustered up the courage to say, you know, I'm a white Jewish student who lives in Wellesley. I've never been in conversation in the ways that I am over the last 3 months with an African American or Latinx young person from Dorchester or Roxbury. Or for those young people to say to me, as they have so beautifully, so tell me again, what is the difference between a rabbi and a minister?
Yeah.
Without shame, without embarrassment, but genuine curiosity. But it requires, greater open-heartedness, to try and do that. And our society doesn't encourage that. So I hope and pray, as both of you said, that some of what has been forced upon us, some of what we are discovering, will be a part of the quote unquote new norms that we have to work to institute. Yeah. Now that they've been present, in different shapes and sizes over the last several months.
Amen.
Thank you. That connects to a question we have in the chat in regard to the interreligious nature of this exhibit and the panel. And Melly Solomon was wanting to hear a bit from, perhaps we can hear from Dr. Ibrahim and Dr. Smith, where interreligious engagement or connection is coming into this experience for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think in so many ways, I'm being inspired what I see other communities doing and thinking, oh, how can we translate that? Or that was a really creative idea. I just preached in a UU church the past weekend, and the whole virtual sermon or virtual experience of church was so moving. They just seamlessly kind of translated so much of what I would expect from a communal experience into this virtual context. And we've, I don't know, I think this creativity where we can learn from each other, and oh, that was a great idea, and I like how you did that. And so on that level of kind of curating the experience for people, we're all in this space where we're inventing and figuring out what works. And that's one area in which I think there can be, and there has been, really productive collaboration and mutual inspiration.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Dr. Smith?
Yeah, I echo and affirm and I share everything that Dr. Celene just said, this power of translating. I also want to keep kind of probably with the thing that I am, the power of expanding my communities and my conversation partners. So one relationship that has come from this pandemic has actually been the relationship with Rabbi Rose, and the proximity and being able to be involved with Hebrew College, which I'm hoping will continue. And now, Dr. Celene, I cannot wait to send you an email afterwards so we can talk about some possibilities. I mean, that's just a bit of it. So again, one of the things for me has been, just as Brenda's exhibit shows how we're showing all of these faith traditions that have found ways to use their faith again to as a catalyst for imagining and expanding how they commune, how they have community. I think that we have to also continue to figure out ways how we come alongside each other and across our interreligious faiths and our different identities and journey with each other, not just for enriching each other, but I also believe in the power of models. I do not think the world in our context has enough models of us who are authentically and genuinely, publicly and proudly coming alongside of each other and saying, yes, I am a Christian, but the Jewish community has been a community that has supported this first generation college student from the very beginning, right? And it's who's with me now. And my Muslim sisters have been and we do that publicly and proudly and intentionally. not only to deepen our relationships, but to model for our communities and for the world that there's other ways of being in proximity to each other. And so that's sort of maybe in some ways I feel like you, or I'm probably being very transparent about what is really important to me now. It was important before, but it's like burning in me now about what I feel deeply that we have to do in these pieces, and that is to build relationships that model another way. And we are as relentless and as unyielding and as unapologetic as those who would insist that we have to return, as you said, Dr. Celene, to these silos and these segregations and these divisions. And we should be even more so, because what we're talking about is what gives life to communities, gives life to God's earth. Okay, I'm going to get off my grandstand now. I'm done.
Thank you. That's a powerful reminder of the power of relationships. It's not just to enrich, but to demonstrate. And it's easy to take for granted the friendships that we have that are revolutionary and are transformative and are countercultural in a lot of ways. And we should not forget that too. So thank you for that reminder. We're coming close to the end of our time together, but I wanted to give a chance for the panelists to, if you have a question for one or all the panels, if you'd like to offer that up. And I'm going to put a reminder about the exhibit and how to visit it in the chat for everyone while you are thinking or asking.
I just want to say that in terms of modeling, one of the important things that we need to do is honor and teach about the people that came before us doing this work. There are resources there that remain still little known. So Shively and I connected in part because we're both students of the late, great Howard Thurman.
Right.
He was an incredible mentor to my teacher, Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi. And there are so many people whose stories, whose work really are important to share, because we learn so much about how we want to live through story. So even on this call, Yecheskel Landau, my brother, my teacher, you've been at this work for 30, 40 years under some of the most difficult circumstances with some very stiff-necked people in a region of the world that has been very painfully broken for far too long. And so we need to share some of what we've learned along the way, including the stories of those people that have bravely come before us. And as you said, Shively, really to celebrate these relationships and the work. Can we be evangelists for radical love and inclusion? Sadly, part of what's happened with Dr. King is that over the generations, his radicality has been worn away at. Remember, it was Dr. King who said, I was once insulted when people called me a radical, but then I realized I come from a long line of radicals, including a man by the name of Amos and another by the name of Jesus. And this is radical work. It has to be grounded, as you said so beautifully, Celene, in humility, but to wear it proudly and to really go out and say, we need to change. Our friend Celene Ibu loves to say, the work of our movement is to move from niche to norm. This isn't something that's just sort of neat or interesting. So one of my proudest moments vis-a-vis my community in the Berkshires or in Chatham is the fact that both of you have been teachers to that community on very important days, on the high holidays. Why doesn't that happen more regularly? Who else should we hear from, during this year than an African-American scholar and teacher and preacher when we're thinking about the binding of Isaac and life and death?
I have to say too, my students at Groton School were able to Zoom into this, and it was actually my first time attending High Holy Day ceremonies, and for them, you know, it was in that particular room, no one came from a Jewish background, and so it was a very new experience, but one that they could kind of like ease into. You know, it wasn't like this overwhelming, all-encompassing thing, but they could just really relate, and we could kind of like talk about what was happening, and I could point out things. And you know, as much as it's kind of awkward, and I talked to Or about like, can we join you as kind of like these a fly on the wall, or you know, students on Zoom, and that to me, or that experience was so powerful. And you know, to hear your you know, your beautiful recitations. And I think, you know, now my students have, when they, you know, when they're learning about textbook Judaism, they have this embodied kind of, as much as it was just over a Zoom screen, you know, this experiential knowledge that they were a part of, that this special moment that they got to, you know, be included in. And so that we were just talking the other day about like, what is a talit? And I said, do you remember when the rabbi went, before he read, put on something? Oh yeah. Okay, so you know, it's that connecting between just learning the vocabulary and getting familiar, and what, you know, what is the material culture, and having that deep sense of appreciation.
I want to add one other point, which is one of my favorite things in life is to introduce wonderful people. And so I am so happy that Celene and Shively are meeting each other. And I can just imagine,
I'm excited.
You know, fabulous work that could come from this. So my question to the two of you is, what comes next? Keep us posted.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the invitation, and for being what Thurman would call a channel, connecting people and allowing resources to flow. I am thankful for that.
Thank you again to our panelists, and thank you all for showing up this evening. As a reminder, please be sure to check out the exhibit. You can, Rosa put a link earlier, and then there's information in the chat about times that you can visit. And as we close, if you'll permit me, I know we're a couple minutes over, but partly in honor of my teachers who are on this call, and in honor of this space together, and Brenda's beautiful exhibit, I wanted to share as our closing intention, or kavanah, as I've adopted from my Jewish siblings. I wanted to share this meditation from Howard Thurman, Meditations of the Heart, which I got to experience with Dr. Shively Smith as well as a student, and through my work with Or and learning about Reb Zalman, etc. So I'd like to share this one with you because it spoke to me about this exhibit and this time. So please take a deep breath and exhale. If thou standeth beside me, if thou standeth beside me, nothing can prevail against me. If thou standeth beside me, there are times when the sense of aloneness is very acute. Often these are times of struggle where the odds are uneven. Curious indeed is it that the sense of not being alone is apt to be most acutely felt when the concentration upon the matter at hand is absorbing. This means that there is available at the moment no margin of me exposed to the presence of God. To be aware that God is standing beside me calls for some measure of detachment from my own personal struggle and turmoil. If thou standeth beside me, it is entirely possible that the presence of God may be most acutely felt in and through the struggle and the turmoil. It is not something apart from my involvements, but a quality of presence that emerges from the midst of my tempests. Or more accurately, it becomes a quality of the tempest itself. Sometimes this identification becomes very confusing, causing me to say that God brings the struggle. It is sufficient for me to know that God is found in the midst of all that befalls me. Nothing can prevail against me. The affirmation is the result of the disclosure of the presence of God in the midst of what befalls me. First, God is felt as being with, in, and among the struggling elements of my experience. Then, out of the midst of these, God's presence emerges and becomes one who stands by my side. It is then that I am lifted up and strengthened. If thou standeth beside me, nothing can prevail against me. Thank you all. Have a beautiful rest of your evening, and thank you again to our panelists. Good night.
Thank you, Tom.